Welcome to Storycraft Portal, where every tale is more than just a story. It's an emotion, a mystery, and a truth waiting to be uncovered. Today, we bring you a chilling case that remained buried in silence for over 2 decades, until one overlooked clue, a single bloody footprint, whispered the killer's name. It's a story of relentless pursuit, shattered lives, and the haunting legacy of a woman whose voice was lost until science finally spoke for her. It was the summer of 1993 when the quiet hum of Minneapolis nights was torn by a scream that never reached the streets. Jeanie Childs, a 35-year-old woman with a kind heart and a troubled past, was found murdered in her Horn Towers apartment. The scene was nightmarish, blood smeared across the walls, her body lying beneath a still-running shower, and terror etched in silence. Police were stunned by the brutality, over 60 stab wounds. The killer hadn't just taken a life, he'd made a statement. Despite a chaotic scene, one thing stood out, a single bloody footprint. But in an age before forensic genealogy, DNA evidence was only a ghost of hope. Her friends and family were devastated, and the city whispered about the unsolved horror. Investigators gathered what they could, but the case soon faded into the archives, waiting for the science to catch up with the truth. As Jeannie's funeral passed, the community held its breath, hoping for justice that never came. Her mother clutched her daughter's favorite sweater, crying out for answers that police couldn't give. Investigators scoured through her contacts, questioned neighbors, friends, and ex-lovers, but nothing stuck. The case turned cold faster than expected, buried beneath files of newer crimes. Jeannie's name became just another number in the backlog, and her mother, year after year, lit a candle in the window, praying someone, somewhere, would remember. Meanwhile, the bloody footprint remained preserved, boxed away in evidence, silent, waiting. New officers would occasionally glance at the file, haunted by the brutality, but paralyzed by lack of leads. In time, only the photo of that footprint remained on a dusty board labeled unsolved. The city moved on, but memory, like truth, refuses to die. Something was coming, something with eyes that could see through DNA. By 2018, science had evolved into something close to magic. Investigators revisited Jeannie's file after a cold case initiative sparked fresh hope. Among the preserved evidence, the footprint and biological samples were still intact. That year, forensic genealogy had just cracked its first major case, and Jeannie's name rose again. DNA from the crime scene was uploaded to a public genealogy database. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was close, a relative. Enter C.C. Moore, a brilliant genetic genealogist who began building family trees backward. Slowly, piece by piece, branches formed, names appeared, and one family line stood out. It was as if the DNA was speaking for Jeannie, pushing through decades of silence. The match wasn't perfect yet, but they were circling someone. The killer wasn't just a ghost anymore. He was someone's brother, son, maybe even a neighbor. And the footprint was finally leading somewhere. As the family tree narrowed, one name kept coming up: Jerry Westrom, a businessman, father of 3, and seemingly ordinary man from Minnesota. He had no known connection to Jeannie, but his DNA was whispering the truth. Investigators tailed him discreetly, watching his every move. Then came the break. Jerry went to a hockey game. He bought a hot dog, and when he left, detectives swooped in, collecting his discarded napkin from the trash. It was the moment they'd waited 26 years for. The lab worked overnight, breath held in hope. When the results came back, the room fell silent. The DNA from the napkin matched the DNA from Jeannie's crime scene. The footprint had a name now. Jerry Westrom wasn't just a suspect. He was the missing piece. And for the first time in decades, Jeannie's photo was taken off the cold case board and moved to active. Jerry was brought in quietly, no handcuffs in public. Not yet. Investigators questioned him calmly, watching for cracks. He denied everything, claimed he'd never even heard of Jeannie, but the DNA didn't lie. When confronted with the evidence, he shifted, stumbled, then grew silent. Police searched his home, Old photos, clothes, nothing directly tied him to Jeanie, until they found journals, writings, small, unsettling things. Meanwhile, media caught wind of the arrest. Jeanie's mother, now older and frail, clutched the phone as the news broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not of joy, but of release. Finally, she whispered, she can rest. Jerry was charged with second-degree murder. The trial would come later, but now justice had a face, a name. The footprint had spoken, and what it revealed was chilling. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes, it wears a smile and lives next door. The trial of Jerry Westrom began under flashing cameras and hushed curiosity. Prosecutors built their case with quiet precision, DNA, the bloody footprint, and a timeline that wove Jerry into Jeanie's final night. The defense argued contamination, coincidence, and character. A father, a businessman, they said. But the jury watched, silent, as experts broke down the genetic truth that DNA doesn't care about reputation. Jeanie's mother sat in the front row, her gaze steady. The footprint photo was shown again, enlarged, undeniable. The room grew cold. It was no longer just about facts. It was about a promise that one day someone would answer for the screams that echoed in that apartment. The defense grew desperate, but the jury wasn't moved by charisma. They were moved by evidence, by a footprint, by science, and by a name that finally stood in the light after years in the dark. In court, Jeanie's life was no longer just a victim's file. She became a person again. Friends spoke of her laughter, her dreams, her love for poetry and sunsets. The prosecutor read from her journals, fragments of a young woman trying to heal from life's bruises. She had flaws, yes, but she had hope too. The jury listened as Jeanie's world was painted, not just her death, but her life. Her mother wept softly. It was the first time in years her daughter felt alive in a room. Jerry sat still, expression unreadable. But every word about Jeanie pulled the jury further from sympathy for the accused. The courtroom transformed. No longer a space for legal arguments, but a place of remembrance. Jeanie was more than evidence. She was a soul, ripped from the world. And now, through this trial, she was finally being heard. The defense made its final stand, calling character witnesses and raising doubts. What if the DNA was mishandled? What if someone else was in the apartment? They painted Jerry as a target of flawed science. But their voices trembled, their arguments cracked. The jury had seen too much. The footprint, the match, the silence in Jerry's eyes. His lawyers avoided the core, the brutality, the motive, the unexplainable presence of his DNA where it never should have been. On the stand, Jerry denied everything again. "I don't know her," he whispered, but silence fell like a hammer. The prosecutor stood, calm and direct, then explained the blood. No answer. The jury watched, and in their eyes, the truth was no longer a question. It was a weight, ready to be delivered. The defense rested, and the courtroom braced itself for the decision that had been decades in waiting. It took the jury less than a day. They returned with solemn faces and steady hands. As the judge asked for their decision, the four persons stood, guilty. The word echoed. Jeanie's mother closed her eyes and wept, not in grief, but in peace. Jerry Westrom stared ahead, unmoving. The courtroom held its breath. After 26 years, the footprint had led justice home. Reporters swarmed outside, headlines forming in real time. But inside, there was only silence, the kind that follows truth. Jeanie's photo was placed beside the judge's bench, honored. The judge spoke of time, of loss, of justice long delayed but not denied. Jerry was taken into custody, his mask cracked, and the room that had once held doubt now held something heavier, closure. It wasn't celebration, it was solemn relief, the kind that only comes when a story finally finds its end. Jerry Westrom was sentenced to life in prison, and as the cell door closed behind him, a chapter closed with it. Jeanie's family gathered days later, not for mourning, but remembrance. They released lanterns into the night sky, one for every year justice was delayed. The footprint, once a haunting reminder, was now a symbol of resilience, of faith, of truth. Her mother, holding Jeannie's favorite flower, whispered, "You're free now." And with that, Jeannie's story, once silenced by fear and time, became a legacy. The case that once sat forgotten in a dusty file had sparked new programs, new hope for other cold cases. Footprint to Murder became more than a case. It became a message that truth has patience, and even the quietest evidence can speak loudly, if only we're willing to listen. Justice had walked its path, and finally it had arrived.